All right, hello everyone. Welcome into another electrifying instance episode of the Geek Garage podcast. I am your host, David, as per usual. With me, as per usual, is my trusty but not dusty co-host, Ted White. How are you doing, buddy?
Apparently trusty but not dusty, so I guess
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
I don't know what the dusty part is. Honestly, I just went with it. It rhymes with trusty. Uh, but dusty like sounded negative, and so
Mm.
I didn't want to say. We're gonna stick with it for right now, I
Are
think,
we?
and then okay, well maybe we'll throw it in the fucking garbage like most of the shit that we come up with. But hey, if it ends up sticking, if we get any sort of positive feedback or any feedback at all, uh, regarding that dumbass intro, then hey, maybe we'll keep it. But
Am I not allowed to object? Do I not get a say in this at all?
we'll talk about it afterwards.
That's a no.
It might just be like the cheesecake thing. I don't know.
Fair.
Uh, but so before we get into this week's episode, which is a continuation of our villains themed month, if you haven't been listening up until now, like Ted said last week, fantastic job.
You're doing great.
You're
Super proud of
really
you guys and girls and gals.
right.
Shit.
Yeah, you have made the active choice to not listen, and I applaud you for that because our show is just mediocre, but that's what we're aiming for, so it is quite apropos. Uh, but we do have a few things to hit on before we continue on with our villains theme month, and of course, we are doing comic book villains. First thing is an update on events. It's more or less the same as last week, with one small exception. EvilCon, like we said, is moved to July 10th through the 12th. MTAC has been postponed, not yet rescheduled. MomoCon has been postponed. This is where the change kicks in from last week. MomoCon has been postponed, but it is moved to 2021. So that I think there was a conflict with trying to find a venue or trying to get their current venue to get them a good rescheduled date, and they just couldn't nail it down, so they had to push it back a year. Same goes with Nashville Comic Con, that was postponed and moved to 2021. As for right now, AkaiCon is still set for July 24th through the 26th. So that is pretty much all we have as far as updates go, especially events. All right, so before we dive into the episode, we're gonna go over our Facebook poll real quick. Ted, you want to take it from here?
Yes, because I have a lot of thoughts on this. And most
uh,
of those thoughts involve you all being terrible disappointments. And I'll tell you why. The theme poll for this week, or at least for this episode, was who was a more effective or a quote-unquote better villain. Not better in the sense of they had some good in them, better in the fact that they were more effective of a villain. The two that we chose were Green Goblin, of course, from Spider-Man, and then the Joker from Batman. And Joker won pretty handily. It was something like 73% of the overall votes
yep.
went to him. And that is wrong. And I will tell you why. You voters allowed your judgment to be clouded, okay? The question wasn't which was better in the movie. Obviously, Heath Ledger's Joker was very good and was the best part by a large margin of The Dark Knight.
Correct.
As a comic book character, the Green Goblin pushes Joker shit in 10 times out of 10, okay? The Green Goblin has a fucking glider and bombs, all right? The Joker has some really, really shitty card tricks. Okay? He has a lapel flower that shoots water or acid, okay? That's going to be super effective of a guy in the fucking sky, all right?
I mean, to play devil's advocate, he did get the best of Batman a couple times, right? I mean, I'm not super versed in the Joker when it comes to the comic books, so that's kind of why I personally voted for Green Goblin in this poll.
Yes, because that's the correct answer, David.
Well, I mean, not just that, but like I've read more iterations of Spider-Man that involved Green Goblin than I did with Batman that involved Joker, at least as the main villain in that story. But yeah, I mean, I don't. What Ted is saying, I pretty much mirror those same thoughts. I feel like, and maybe it's partly my fault for not being super clear, but the pictures that I did put on the poll were not pictures from the movies. It was not Heath Ledger's Joker or Joaquin Phoenix's Joker or Jared Leto's Joker,
Which
which
doesn't
would
exist. I don't know what you're talking about.
right, exactly. And it wasn't Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. They were both. I made active attempts to choose images for these two villains from the comic books. And like Ted said, I have a little bit of an inkling that people were voting based off of the movie versions of these two villains. And while that's definitely a different poll, a different story, a different result set, I feel like. But as for the comic books go, I feel like people tend to with this poll they voted with their experience with the Joker in movies versus the Green Goblin in movies. So that's
Now, to be fair, I did go a little hard on the voters earlier, and while I am thankful, and we are thankful that
we're very
anybody
thankful.
contributed, it's all in good fun. Your opinions
Mhm.
aren't wrong, despite them being in fact incorrect. Um, I could see how a case could be made for the Joker, right? Because he is basically Batman's arch nemesis, and the point is, he can't fucking fly. All right, the Green Goblin is not only an effective villain as the Green Goblin, he's an effective villain just as Norman Osborn.
Right.
So that to me really is why he edges out. The glider is just a funny comment and really cool, but in my opinion, he does edge out in just about any way you want to look at it.
Right. Not to point anyone out, but since this is a little on the positive side, our buddy Mac, he actually voted for the Green Goblin. So high five, Mac. You're one of the very small percentage people that
With the correct choice.
right.
As we know, Mac has been on the podcast, longtime friend to the show.
Hmm.
Very intelligent, very good guy. Even though his Star Trek opinions are not always 100%, uh, still a solid guy.
Right.
He
Yeah.
likes Sequest. You gotta give it up for that.
Hey, I think on that episode we all found some pretty solid common ground with the next generation. I think.
Yes, how it's
Eh,
you know what? Let's not relitigate the past. Mac's a solid guy. He's a solid guy.
right. Yeah. And we are also getting way off topic. So, I
Bold of you to
think
assume we had one to begin with.
that is that is most definitely true.
Anyway, long
Um,
story short,
yeah.
Joker won.
Yeah.
I
Thank
demand
you.
a recount, but I won't get one. So
But yeah, what you should take away is that thank you once again for participating in polls, and we will try not to yell at you too much in the
I
future
make no such
for
promises.
for making the wrong choices. So without further ado, Ted, do you have anything else before we kick off this intro music?
Yeah, one last thing, just as a reminder, if you did not listen to the previous episodes we did on this theme for Villains Month, reminder that the criteria are as follows. First and most importantly, each character that we have chosen has to actively choose to partake in evil or to do bad things.
Yes.
Something like the Sentinels, for example, from X-Men, while definitely effective, while definitely great plot devices, they're machines.
Mhm.
So they don't have the free will, so to speak, to make those decisions and hunt mutants. That's what they were designed to do.
Right.
Um, that's the biggest and really only point that we had gone into. So I think that David and I both kind of stuck to more mainstream
Yep.
choices. That's not to say that there aren't great villains in, I guess, alternative comics, or maybe I don't want to say lesser known in like a derogatory way, but other imprints that aren't just like Marvel or DC,
Right.
that maybe don't have the reach of those two,
Yeah.
because there definitely are great characters in those, and some of my favorite books are from like Image Comics, which I guess is pretty big, and
Yeah.
some other things like that. So
Yeah, we may do going forward. We may do maybe another theme month or another episode where we cover like lesser known villains that we think deserve to be discussed a little bit more. So
yeah, so it wasn't necessarily an active decision to steer away from those, to belittle them, just more so. As with all the episodes, we try to attack each topic from a point where, if you're
highly
an absolute
accessible,
beginner, you can dive in and learn some new stuff and not feel overwhelmed. But
right?
if you have, some experience with the topic, then, you're not just going to be uninterested, like, oh, this is just like beginners 101 for whatever.
Right.
That said, for a comics newbie, it's probably best to stick to some of the bigger imprints.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I looked over both lists and I think they're pretty solid.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion, and it's infallible, as we all know. So I'm comfortable with it. Other than that, that's all I had. David, hit the music and let's get a shit show on the road. All right, so I will kick off the proceedings here with my first choice for what I think are the best or the most effective or the most villainous villains in comics. And number one, I said it when we did the intro to the very first themed episode about this, the very first teaser we ever did, the answer was Darkseid. And I stuck with that. Born as Euxus, a literal god from another dimension, he destroyed the pantheon of gods that birthed him, just cause. I'm sure there was a reason in comic lore. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it probably wasn't as good of a reason as because he was a badass who wanted to do badass things.
Hmm.
His ultimate goal is to conquer and destroy all free will and all sentient beings. So, I mean, that's like you really don't get more villainous than that. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, also, he called your mom fat. Whoa, like he's the ultimate dick. Um, his sort of secondary goal, or I guess tied in tertiary maybe to the first ultimate goal, is that he wants to discover the anti-life equation.
Hmm.
Aside from sounding badass, that would give him total control over the thoughts and emotions of all living beings in the universe. Like I said, he's just a real peach, this guy.
Yes, he sounds like it.
Yeah. One of his, I guess probably his primary weapon, or one of his most famous weapons or abilities, are the Omega Beams. You've probably seen these. A lot of artist renditions of Darkseid have these like red, they look like lasers coming out of his eyes. Those are the Omega Beams. They can go in a straight line like you would think of like a normal laser blast, but they can also like go around corners and do all kinds of crazy things because physics are for not Darkseid. They're so badass that not only can they kill a thing just by touching it, they can also bring that thing back to life and then kill it again just cuz. I want to be the super dick today. That's what we're going to do. But my
Jesus
favorite
Christ.
Darkseid fact, and the real reason that he's number one, aside from the ultimate goal of total destruction of the entire universe, is that he is so powerful. He's too powerful to exist in any dimension other than his own. He literally would shatter reality if his being came into our dimension. So anytime he's ever been in a comic and it wasn't on Apocalypse, which is his home base, home planet,
Hmm.
it's been an avatar or a projection. And that projection has still whooped that ass. So the Darkseid is basically the king of the mountain, as far as I'm concerned.
Is Darkseid DC?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I can't remember when you brought him up originally. I remember asking what he was from, and I remember. Yeah,
Yeah,
questioning.
he's a DC villain. He is basically, it's tough to say he's the arch nemesis of the Justice League, since their rogues gallery is huge because it comprises all of their individual rogues galleries.
Right.
But he's basically the ultimate bad. I guess the biggest sort of comparison you could point to, or the most obvious comparison you could point to in between DC and Marvel characters would be Darkseid and Thanos. Of course, Thanos is probably more popular just because of the MCU and the films, but
Sure.
in terms of power and in terms of like who is a more terrifying villain, Darkseid is basically everything Thanos wishes he was.
Hmm.
He's basically what Thanos wants to be when he grows up. He's just like the ultimate evil, basically.
Sure. I mean, like I don't want to shift focus from Darkseid to Thanos too much, but I mean, for in the spirit of comic book villains, anyways, I was thinking about this last night, and I was like, wait, like I only really have what I've seen in the movies to go off of with Thanos, but it seems like Thanos would be relatively conquerable if it wasn't for his fucking gauntlet with
Yeah.
the Infinity Stones. Like it seems like without that, he isn't too badass of a villain, or that much of a mountain to conquer. If
I
that
mean,
makes
it
any
it,
sense.
it kind of depends, I guess. I mean, he's definitely conquerable. Um, the Infinity Gauntlet and the stones definitely make him like more fearsome. Like the Infinity Gauntlet run in the comics is phenomenal and so much better than the films. It's like almost offensive, but
Yeah, I've heard nothing but great things about that run.
fantastic, fantastic run. Um, there have been a lot of discussions. Like I said, this is a super obvious comparison. I'm not the first person to make it or talk about it. Like this is a thing that's gone on, and comic geeks have debated this for forever, basically.
Hmm.
Um, there's some really good videos on YouTube, which is probably a thing I'll never say again, about this sort of back and forth between Darkseid and Thanos, and like the the only way that Thanos could even really stand a chance, and this is getting like super deep into geekdom, is like, what if he has the full powered gauntlet? Well, according to like canon, the gauntlet only works in this universe
Hmm.
or like this multiverse. So in the DC multiverse, it wouldn't have any power. But also, like Darkseid literally can't exist in our reality, or he would
Sh-
shatter it. So it's
sure.
just like it's not even really. It's like
If you want to talk like true hypotheticals, the fight literally could never happen. Almost, it kind of seems like that's what you're
well,
getting
yes,
at. Like,
because they're fake, but also
well, no, I'm talking about because like they can't, their them and their powers can't exist in the same universe.
yeah, I mean, even a projection of Darkseid would take down Thanos. And like I
Hmm.
like Thanos as a comic character. In the movies we have some other discussions, but that's well known and not really of this podcast. But
Right.
um yeah, Darkseid is basically just like just shy of invincible. I can't remember the storyline this was in, but in one issue in some storyline, he's literally like disintegrated and they're like, "Oh, Darkseid's finally dead. Yay." And then his being like just wills itself back into existence basically. So um he's like essentially not invulnerable, but not invulnerable, excuse me, but like immortal.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, we spent quite a bit of
Shot our
time
wad
on.
a little early there.
What'd you say?
I said we shot our wad a little early there. Maybe I should have saved him for second.
Eh,
I don't know.
nah, I mean that was a great way to kick off this episode. I mean I didn't know a whole lot about Darkseid. Let me rephrase that. I knew nothing about Darkseid. So yeah, that was great info to get. Do you have any more thoughts before we move on to my first villain?
Um, no. Dark Side rules. I don't know. That's it.
Doyle rules.
Right.
All right. Well, for my first villain, I picked Doctor Octopus, aka Doc Ock from Marvel slash Spider Man, and I like Doc Ock because he and Peter Parker they shared very similar like childhood, teenage, and adulthoods, but they both turned out to kind of be on the you know the side of a different sides of the same coin, the one turned out to be a hero, one turned out to be a villain. I just found that, pretty interesting. But I like that he is. I think he's effective because he's complex and conflicted, and he knows how to use his oftentimes, like, no pun, or I guess pun intended, superior intelligence to his advantage to beat Spider-Man. He also has like that arrogance and narcissism that are quite prevalent in a lot of villains. So I pulled a lot of my knowledge and know-how from from Superior Spider-Man, the run. I think it started around 2012, and granted, yes, I know for those of you that are familiar with this run of Spider-Man, uh, Doc Ock isn't really the quote-unquote villain. He's the run before, and this kind of goes into spoilers, I guess, if you're interested in this run. The run beforehand, he swaps bodies with Parker, like at the very last second, when Doc Ock's body is decaying and dying. So he finds a way to swap bodies. So Parker actually is in Doc Ock's body, and then Parker dies. And then Doc Ock lives on as Spider-Man slash Peter Parker. And so this whole run of Superior Spider-Man, everyone's like, Peter, like, you're not acting like yourself. And then, Spider-Man goes around like shooting people in the face with a gun. They're like, that's not fucking Spider-Man. And then the Avengers are like, hey, Spidey, you're not acting like yourself. And yeah, it's really because this fucking douchebag Doc Ock is going around thinking that he's the superior, Spider-Man, and it's pretty interesting for almost the entirety of the run, up until like he realizes that his crux is like his arrogance. And this is kind of harping back to what I was just talking about. It's that ends up being the thing that takes him down, is thinking that he's like the best, that he knows more than Spider-Man. Like he set out to prove to himself and everyone else that he could be a better Spider-Man, and that was fueled by the fact that he couldn't, like, he was so pissed off that now has to live on through Peter Parker slash Spider-Man, that he can't be himself. So I don't know, like, I know this isn't a super accurate, like me making a case in point for Doc Ock as a villain, but this is him as Spider-Man. And I don't know. I stand by what I think, regardless of whether he's being portrayed as Superior Spider-Man or whether it's actually Doc Ock. I still think that he plays a fantastic villain, especially how he shares so much so much like personality traits, and his intelligence mirrors Peter's as well, and so I don't know. I just find him very interesting and effective.
No, I mean, I think that's a great pick. He was very close to being on my short list. Unfortunately, I did have him in my honorable mentions, but I figured since you brought him up, I'll go ahead and kind of pitch in my 2 cents here.
Sure.
To me, he's almost like the quintessential Spidey villain.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about Spider-Man, I think about like the classic red and blue suit, and then the classic Doctor Octopus, which is like short, squat with a bowl cut.
Yeah.
Those are like the first two things I think about. And I think you hit the nail on the head. He is basically the equal, if not superior, to Spider-Man or Peter Parker in intellect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and beyond that, he's just a great villain. Like, he literally brought 5 other supervillains in the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery together and created the Sinister Six,
Yep.
which is fucking dope and evil as shit. So, no, I think that's a great pick.
Yeah, it was this run. If you or anyone else gets a chance out there to read Superior Spider-Man, if you're looking for a great Spider-Man run to get into that is not like your typical Spider-Man, like I said, it's Spider-Man, but it's but it's not. So I had a lot of fun with this particular iteration. Uh it was a fucking roller coaster ride of emotions. I'll say that much. I don't want to spoil anything that happens, just because it was so fantastic. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. Ted, what is your next pick?
The next villain I want to talk about, which is probably my second favorite villain, just conveniently, is Galactus,
Yes.
the Devourer of Worlds. Um, he literally just consumes planets to sustain his life force. Like, that's fucking hard, yo. Like, I don't know what else to say about that. He's got a really interesting backstory where he existed in like the universe before the Big Bang. I was a space explorer. When the Big Bang occurred, or shortly thereafter, he unified with the sentience of the universe and then became a demigod. So technically, I'm bending the rules here a little bit since he's beyond our conceptions of morality as a demigod. I don't know that you can say he's actively choosing to engage in evil because it's just like it's not even a concept to him. It's like you know, it's like a boot crushing an ant almost. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like beyond the ant's comprehension, or the like. I don't know. It's just like, is it really evil? The reason I'm going to allow this, and yes, I am the final say in this, is that he is still draining the life force from planets. Like, so, um, pretty much everybody else would consider that evil, and he actively chooses to do that. So I'm saying he makes the cut.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important criteria that we came up with is that they have to actively make that decision to be evil, knowing that it's evil and or wrong, quote unquote. And so, yeah, I think by that definition, it fits pretty well.
Yeah. He has the ultimate nullifier weapon, which can destroy and then remake the universe, which is
Oh, okay.
that's badass too, also as well. And like to me, Galactus is such a like a home run villain. I don't understand how he hasn't been involved in a good movie. His portrayal in the second Fantastic Four movie from like 10 or 15 years ago is one of the times like that portrayal was so offensive to me. Like,
Apparently it was pretty offensive to me too, because I just blocked it out. Like, I don't even remember that being a thing. I mean, that was the Silver Surfer one, right?
yes, the Silver
Okay.
Surfer is his herald, his current herald. Um,
Okay.
or at least he was at that time. I don't know if he still is in comics. I'm a little out of the loop, but he's definitely the most famous of the Galactus heralds, where he just basically comes to the planet and is like, "Hey, prepare because Galactus is going to come fuck your shit up."
Right.
And he's in Silver Surfer is in the film and is I guess the main antagonist for most of it. And then at the end of it, Galactus shows up, and rather than seeing like the classic badass looking Galactus, it's just like a storm cloud. And I remember watching that and being like, there will never be another good comic book movie. Fuck all of you. You don't deserve this.
Yeah, that was back in like the early 2000s when comic book movies were just like up until that point most of them just were not great. Like
See, I
I don't know.
disagree because there were some that were really, really good. Like the
That's why I
original,
said most, not
yeah, the
all.
original X-Men trilogy, or
Oh
at least
yeah,
two of the
that
three, are
yeah.
really good.
Uh-huh.
The original Spider-Man trilogy, or at least two of the three,
Uh-huh.
two and a half of the three, are really
Yeah.
good.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
the oh
but
yeah,
then the
the
bad is like catastrophically bad.
right, yeah. I don't know. Maybe when and if they incorporate the Fantastic Four into the MCU, they'll get it right this time, but we'll see. I mean, it was another fucking hard swing and a miss when they tried to incorporate it again with I don't know if that was with Sony or what, but
I think it was
uh
Sony, and that was Josh Trank who directed it, and that is like a
sure.
legendary shit show of a
Yeah.
production.
Yeah, I
Um,
caught half of it, got bored out of my fucking mind, and I had to turn it off. I was like, I'd
yeah,
much rather watch the originals because at least that has like Jessica Alba in it.
and also
I
Chris
mean,
Evans for
yes, also Chris Evans, who played a pretty okay. I was about to say Johnny Blaze, but that's not right.
Johnny
What's
Storm.
Yeah, there you go. That's the name I was looking for. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, he
um,
was actually a pretty decent Johnny Storm, but yeah. They're
yeah,
very
yeah,
bad movies. I don't know what else to say.
yeah. Plus, sigh is the correct response.
Yeah, yeah, basically.
All right. All right. We ready to push forward? I suppose.
God, please, yes.
All right. Well, I chose Bane from Batman for my next one. So I am not currently finished reading the run that I'm in the middle of with Bane, but I'm going to talk about him anyways because I do have sufficient knowledge. I found his backstory pretty interesting, although pretty fucking tragic, and I almost cried before I got through like just his little intro thing because it was so fucking sad. Like he's life sentenced before he's even fucking born to be imprisoned for crimes that his father committed, and I don't know, just the way that it was described, the writing. I wish I took the time to make note of the writer of this run. I think it was more than one writer. Ted, you might have some insight as to the writers for um
Yeah, it was multiple.
um but anyways, so I thought he was a pretty effective villain because he's not only like he's a physical match for Batman. In fact, just like we saw in Dark Knight Rises, it holds true in the comic books that he's like a physical match and defeats Batman like on the first go around, like he breaks his back. And but he knew that it would take more than brawn to destroy Batman. He couldn't just come in and fucking clean his clock. He had to wear him down in some form or fashion. And the plan that he devises is pretty brilliant for the most part. I think it's a little bit of a bitch move. A little bit of a spoiler alert here. He him and his cronies, I say cronies because they're actually also pretty smart like Bane, but the three or four of them like blow a fucking hole in the side of Arkham Asylum and let all the bad guys escape that are currently in there, which is like all of them. Like they're fucking all in there. And so Batman and Robin, they have to play cleanup for like several issues before Bane really like comes into the picture, like where him and Batman meet face to face finally. But by that point in time, like Batman is so worn down physically and mentally by having to take on all these villains and get them, all corralled back into Arkham. And by that time, he is like in no condition to to face Bane. And while I understand why Bane did that, like he didn't do it so much to let all these villains wear him down so he could come in and just wipe him out with a few quick punches and kicks. He mostly did that to find out more about Batman because at that point in time he really only knew things about Batman by what I can't remember his name. He keeps on getting referred to as like Bird. I think it might be like Falcon or the Falcon or something like that. Ted, you might remember a little bit better than I do, but in the comic books, for the most part, I think he just gets referred to as Bird. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I thought that he was a very good villain, very effective, just because he's not only a mental match for Batman, he's also a physical match.
Yeah, a great pick. That Nightfall run, it's a little too long, but that's true of a lot of comic book runs.
It's yeah, when I started reading it, it was like 670 pages. I was like,
Yeah,
fuck.
it's long. It was over a year. Um,
Oh yeah.
I can't remember exactly how many issues it was, and I think it stretched out over a couple of titles as well, so it was pretty long.
Right.
Um, I very, very heavily considered Bane, not as one of my like top three or what have you, but as like an honorable mention. The only problem with Bane is that like his first run is his best, and it's not even close.
Uh,
Um,
is this considered his first?
yeah, that is the
Okay.
introduction of the character, that Nightfall run.
Okay.
Um, and it's a very strong book. It's a very good series, and it like the character of Bane never really lives up to that again, in my opinion. Um, you did bring up the Dark Knight Rises, and while this is a comics episode, not a movie episode, like
Hmm.
I feel like Tom Hardy did a pretty good job. It was an interesting iteration
Yeah.
on the character. We're not going to talk about the version from I think it was Batman Forever that was really really bad and completely
Where
misunderstood the character.
Yeah, where he was basically like a Poison Ivy's sex slave.
That's not the way I would have described it, but yes.
Well, I remember as a kid watching it, and she like took him out of like this tomb thing that she was wheeling around or some shit, and I was like, wait, is she like, is Bane her submissive? Like, is that what's
Yes,
going
that's her
on here?
sub.
Yeah, like I was like 13 at the fucking time, and I was like, wait, this seems oddly sexual.
Yeah, that's just like a fundamental misunderstanding of the character by people who did not really have an appreciation for comics.
Clearly,
Where it's just like the character of Bane in the comics is like very intelligent, a great planner, great tactician, and also huge and juiced up because of Venom.
right?
I think it's called the Venom.
Yeah, yeah. It's just called Venom or the Venom,
Yeah.
whatever.
Obviously different than the symbiote Venom from Marvel,
Yes,
but Venom's just a cool word, so that's what they went with.
right,
Whereas in that film he was just like basically zombie strong.
right. Yeah, it
Um,
wasn't really.
it's bad.
Yeah, I think it. It seemed like they made an active effort to not really take the time to explain why he wears the mask. I mean, there's even the crack at the beginning where the dude on the airplane's like, why does he wear the mask? And you know, he's like, it doesn't matter why or
Well, no, they do explain it. They explain that he's in like constant pain, and that those basically that the mask basically pumps in painkillers.
sure,
And that's in the Dark Knight Rises. In the comics, that's the source of Venom. Like that's how
right,
he gets the jolt from Venom. I believe.
right,
It's been a long
yeah,
time since I've read it, but I think that's right.
yeah. He's got like a little control panel or something on his arm, and I think it's controlled by like these four hoses or such
Yeah,
that.
they come out. It's a pack on his back that go into the mask. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Um, it's very interesting the way that all this is written. I like the way that they took the time with Bane before they dropped into the Batman storyline. But I also like going off of what I've read with this. I actually have to applaud like Chris Nolan and the writers for The Dark Knight Rises because like I think they did a pretty good job. And I know we're not here to talk about the movies like you said, but I think they did a pretty decent job at writing a movie version of Bane. Like we said, it's definitely better than the uh the earlier version of Bane and
yeah,
that what the Joel Schumacher Batman
yeah. Fuck
or
you, Joel Schumacher, just forever. Just forever.
yeah, is he even making movies anymore? I hope not.
I think he's retired. He has kind of expressed some regrets, and has said like he wanted it to be campy and fun and for kids, and that's one of the reasons he got the job is because when Burton turned in like the weird S&M Catwoman, the studio was like, "What the fuck is this, dude? Like this is no, we can't have this." So they
Right,
turned it over to somebody who, you know, was going to make a family friendly movie or very close to family friendly movie.
right.
Doesn't help that they were terrible,
Yeah.
and they were. And anybody who's trying to reassess them now 20 years later is blinded by nostalgia. I'm sorry. I get nostalgia 100%, but those movies are fucking bad.
Yeah, they're not great. Nipples on the Batman suit. Not a wise idea, but
Yeah.
we're gonna push forward.
Yes, we're
um
gonna. Ooh, this is taking a turn.
it
Let's get back
has.
into the good.
Yeah.
so bad, I guess.
Yes. Ted, what is your next pick?
I didn't set out to do this. It just sort of happened this way. And I kind of went in reverse order and made it a countdown of sorts of my favorite villains. But my all-time favorite villain in comic books is Dr. Victor Von Doom. I don't know. There's something about this villain that's always stuck with me. It really struck a chord with me and always stuck with me. I've never really been a big Fantastic Four fan.
Hmm.
Um, it just never really grabbed me, other than Doctor Doom. And I think the reason that I like Doctor Doom so much is not just because it's an interesting character, like he's a super genius, and all this, but like he's just a very human villain. And what I mean by that is like he's arrogant, he's vain, like he lets his pride get the best of him. Like you look at a lot of these villains, like Darkseid, for example. Like pride is definitely a point in his character, but he's also like a supreme being.
Hmm.
So it's cool. Like Darkseid's a cool character, but like in terms of development and complexity and interest, like he's kind of lacking.
Sure.
Whereas Doctor Doom is like a complex character, one of the most complex villains in my opinion, because despite his obvious evil actions and his villainy, he has a deep care for his nation and his subjects,
Hmm.
and he genuinely has wishes for a utopian society. Now, he does want to be the ruler of that society,
Right.
and despite those genuine wishes for utopia, he does pursue evil intentions to get there. However, he does also allow himself to be judged by the Panther God of Wakanda, who basically looks deep into your soul to determine what the actual truth is.
Hmm.
And, you know, the the Panther God was like, no, that's legit. He really wants this. He doesn't want to be the ruler of it, but like he wants a better world. There's so many instances of Doom talking about this where he's like, I have looked at all the data and I have looked at the future and I have seen that there is only one true utopia, and that is Doom World, which is basically like, where he's God, essentially.
Uh-huh.
Um, he's got so many great lines in all of, his history. One of my favorites is just it's really simple. It's just, I am Doom, destroyer of worlds. What gods dare stand against me? Which is fucking hard as shit. Like,
That is pretty fucking hard.
yeah, that's badass.
Yeah.
Um, he just rules, and I'm not a collector by any stretch, but one of my prized possessions, something I had to have when I saw it, is a life size, full size replica of the Doom mask and like head.
Hmm.
And it fucking is dope.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's his costume is pretty fucking scary.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think I've seen too many Doctor Doom cosplays with going to the conventions that we've been to, like MTech or GalaxyCon or any of the others. Like I don't know if I've seen a Doctor Doom. I, not to say that there hasn't been one, but I don't think we've seen one. So that's
Yeah,
that.
it's not from what I've seen, it's not a super popular cosplay, and I think probably a big reason for that is that a lot of people are more familiar with the movie versions of Doom, which are offensive, straight up offensively bad.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was like, how are they offensive? But offensive is in like they're terrible.
Terrible, yeah.
Yeah,
They offend the sensibilities.
sure.
Um, and also, like, since he's made of, he's got that metal armor, that seems like it'd be pretty difficult to do in a way that looked good and also wasn't like awful to wear.
Sure. Yeah. Uh, that's definitely true. Um,
And I think also, this is just kind of maybe me thinking about it, but I think a lot of the people that would be into the idea of crafting a suit of armor would probably be more into cosplaying as like someone for like a knight or someone from Game of Thrones or from like a popular fantasy series rather than like Doctor Doom.
sure. Yeah. Well, maybe this would be an opportunity for me to take on that task. Probably never have the time to do it, so it'll probably never happen. But um, you know, what's the harm in looking into it?
Sure.
uh, but if that's all you got on Doctor Doom, we'll press forward with my last villain.
Knock it out.
All right. So my last villain is the Green Goblin. Yeah, we're going to talk about this fucking guy a couple more minutes after we talked him up during the poll. So I liked him because it was no accident that we pitted him up against the Joker in the Facebook poll. Like, I find them pretty akin to each other. They're both very like dastardly in the same way of, they play pranks and jokes, and but like, I'm a sucker for a backstory, and the thing about Joker is that he doesn't fucking have one. And I get that, but like, the reason why Green Goblin is the way that he is because he was Norman Osborn, and now he's the Green Goblin. And you know there's point A and there's point B, but with the Joker there's just point B. So that's a lot of the reason why I picked Green Goblin. I think he's an effective villain because of a lot of the reasons that we've talked about so far in the podcast intro. But he also he has some really honestly has some really cool tech, like the hoverboard and the pumpkin bombs and the goblin gas that he uses to create a goblin army that is fucking terrifying. Not to mention the fact that like he's still like Norman Osborn with like the smarts of Norman Osborn, where he found Spider-Man's like little spider bots and reprogrammed them to where anytime they saw a Green Goblin or Hobgoblin mask or outfit, uniform, costume, what have you, it would totally ignore the fact that it was a threat. So the Green Goblin was able to build this entire army under Spider-Man's nose without him knowing that all this was going on, and then he just fucking attacked, and there was literally nothing Spider-Man could do to stop him. And yeah, it was just that particular um run of the Green Goblin was very excellent. And that plan was, while it was kind of sad to watch happen, you knew in the back of your mind like it was happening to Doc Ock, and fuck that guy. He deserved it because he was an asshole. So it was kind of fun to root for the villain for a few quick seconds until things shifted a little bit at the very end. But yeah, like I said, I thought that um, the Green Goblin is pretty cool. He's he likes to initiate his attacks like almost like a domino effect, where he like knocks down one domino and then like the rest just like fall into place. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I thought he's pretty effective.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Green Goblin. It's almost two villains in one because you have Norman Osborn,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the Green Goblin, which is Norman Osborn originally, but then also some other people take up the mantle later.
Right, because
And
Norman Osborn is just like an antagonist from like day one.
yeah, and that's what I was getting at is like not only is he a villain as the Green Goblin, but he's just a villain as Norman Osborn with like Oscorp, and he,
Right,
I think in recent or at least fairly recent, story continuity, like he's doing things as Norman Osborn, like taking over different things to like set him up to be able to do evil things as Norman Osborn and not even need the Green Goblin.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, that's cool.
yeah. He pretty much does that same thing in. I know this isn't a comic book, but in the Spider-Man PS4 game, like he does that too. Like he is a major dick in the Spider-Man PS4 game, where he basically just uh um buys a Doc Ock's company, and he's forces him out, and yeah, takes all his tech, and he's like, "Yep, you're fucked now. All your shit is mine." And I was like, dick move, man, dick move.
That was a dick move.
Yeah, but yeah, that's pretty much all I got for Green Goblin. Should we get to honorable mentions?
Honorable, yes,
Honorable.
yes. Um, it was very difficult to Like I've been reading comic books for like the better part of 3 decades, so it was pretty difficult for me to make a list that wasn't 500 characters long. And then it was super difficult to trim it down to 10 or so. Um, I think I did a fairly decent job. I mean, like I said, these are chalk pretty much, I guess, in the sense that I don't think there were any like anything out of left field necessarily.
Sure.
And my honorable mentions are pretty much the same. Um, First one I have that I want to point out is Lex Luthor
Okay.
from DC and Superman. Just another great human villain. He doesn't have any powers to speak of unless you want to count like supreme intelligence and wealth, but he just possesses all the worst qualities of humanity. Very versatile character. So in different eras, he's been different things. So, um, he's like the super xenophobic guy where he's like, Superman's an alien and that's bad. He's like the Wall Street tycoon slash corporate executive, greed is good, Gordon Gecko type character in one era. To I think fairly recently he was so he was like a politician, which is gross also. So like just all the terrible things a human being could be, Lex Luthor has pretty much been them.
Right.
um there have been some really good iterations of Luthor as a villain or quasi villain as well. It's just a great character all around. Next I have Magneto. It was very difficult to leave him off of my short list
Hmm.
because I think he's basically the perfect foil for the X-Men and in particular Charles Xavier. But when I was looking at it, I was like, is he as interesting or as great of a character or villain as any of the three I mentioned? And I was like, as interesting, yes. As great of a villain, probably not. So
Sure.
it was kind of tough. But like I said, I think he basically is the perfect foil. He is like the quintessential X-Men villain,
Hmm.
in my opinion. He's I think the villain that most people think of when they think about the X-Men. I think it's probably the X-Men and Magneto, or the X-Men and Magneto and the Sentinels in some order. Um, Next I have Kingpin from Marvel. I think he debuted as a Spider-Man villain, if my memory serves correctly, but he's been kind of a thorn in everybody's side at one time or another.
Yeah.
A lot of great runs with the Punisher as well, um, and Daredevil, of course. Just a great villain because again, he's human and he's just like the kingpin of crime. Like he's just like a crime boss, which is um, interesting in that in comic books it's typically about like superheroes and supervillains, and he's just like a regular dude who's still just like going toe to toe with superheroes.
Right.
Ozymandias from Watchmen. Um, he destroyed a huge part of the population to get world peace, which your results may vary, but to me that's a huge dick move. Oroku Saki, the Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Ninjas fucking rule. The name the Shredder fucking rules. His armor fucking rules.
Hmm.
I don't know what else needs to be said. Just like duh.
Also, Super Shredder.
Yes, Super Shredder also fucking rules.
Super Shredder.
Yeah. Also has one of my favorite lines. Again, this is about comics, not movies necessarily, but in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: Secret of the Ooze, he has one of the great lines where he says about Toka and Razor, they're babies. And the way he says it with like all the subtlety of a crowbar to the face is wonderful. It's magnificent. Next, I have MODOK, the mental organism designed only for killing, based only on the name alone. Legitimately, that's the only reason I picked him. That's
All
fucking
right.
tough. And then finally, I have Solomon Grundy. Not a great villain. Not a lot of great Solomon Grundy stories. But how do you not like a character that is basically the zombie version of the Hulk? Like, right? Like, how do you not? How do you not? And that's it. That's my list of great villains.
Dope. I like your honorable mentions. They're
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I might have to plug your brain after we're done recording about a couple of these because I'm very interested in some good runs that I might be able to check these out in. So, but I'll continue with my honorable mentions. They're not as lengthy as yours. I don't have well, I have about the same amount, but not as not nearly as much to say and as articulate as you tend to be. But I wanted to pick two that are from lesser known but still pretty relatively popular comic book runs, iterations, what have you. And the two or three really are from Umbrella Academy, and that's Hazel and Cha Cha. The I really wanted to put these, like, if we were doing comic book villains from the show or movie that they were based off of from the comic book, these would hands down be on that list. Uh, the only reason why, or one of the reasons why they're not on my main list for comic book villains, is because they have such a short part in the comic books compared to the show. Like in the show, Hazel and Cha Cha, they're there for pretty much the entire season. And they're pretty good in the show, and they're excellent in the comic book, but like I said, they're not around for very long. um they're just fucking psychotic in the show. Like they're eating like pie at this diner, and what the chef comes out and he's like, "You like my pie, eh? Like I've been working on this recipe since I was a boy, and it was passed down from generation to generation, blah blah blah." And he's one of them, either Hazel or Cha Cha. They're like, any way we could get the recipes? Like, you'd have to kill me first. And they both look at each other like, ah. And then they proceed to like dismember this dude, and then like kill everyone in the diner. So that was pretty fucking harsh. um but that was kind of like the pinnacle of their reign in the comic books. Their reign was relatively short-lived in the comics. But anyways, also from the Umbrella Academy, I chose Viola. She's great in the show once again, but kind of a little lackluster in the comic books, comparatively speaking. But she still is pretty powerful. Her motives are pretty relatable on a human level. Like she was the only one. Well, she was raised to believe that she was the only one out of the seven um that were adopted by what's his name, Hargreaves, that didn't have any superpowers. But as we all know, turns out that she does have superpowers. But she grew up believing that she wasn't special, and he like crammed this down her fucking throat. And once she got this quote unquote makeover by this dastardly orchestra out of all villains, she has now the power to play her violin and just literally tear a hole through fucking people, and the universe. So yeah, pretty badass. I kind of had to put her on there. Also, I have Poison Ivy, and Joker and Two-Face from the DC universe. I felt like I had to mention them. And then Kingpin, Ted, he kind of mentioned Kingpin as well. Uh, I pretty much echo everything that he said about Kingpin. I I love his portrayal in comic books as well as the show. I know that we're not talking about the Marvel Netflix shows, but yeah, I loved his portrayal by Vincent D'Onofrio. I thought it was fucking on point and goddamn terrifying, in fact. But yeah, I, don't know, I had to stick him on here in my honorable mention. So yeah, that is my list.
That's a solid list.
Yeah, I like I said, I'm my knowledge isn't as adequate as yours to be able to back up my reasonings, but I have my reasons nonetheless. So yeah. All right, so I think with that, that is going to do it for this episode. For our final episode of this villains theme month series, we of course are doing a watch along. We haven't narrowed down our movie just yet. We have a few contenders in our back pocket that we're tossing around. We'll probably throw up a poll here soon on Facebook to see what people would most likely be interested in. We may or may not do that if we have a hard enough time coming up with something on our own that we
I'm
really
dropping
think
you again.
would stick. We, of course, part of the point of doing this podcast is to make content that people are actually interested in, I think. So yeah, we may end up doing that here very soon in the near future. So that might actually be going on by the time this episode airs. So definitely be on the lookout for that if it hasn't hit these social media airwaves by the time this hits the podcast airways. So yeah, Ted, you got anything else you want to mention before we sign off this bitch?
Not really. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
be dumb.
Yeah, don't cough in anyone's mouth or let anyone cough in your mouth. Wipe down your groceries, I guess, if you are able to have Clorox or Lysol wipes. And
Okay, we should definitely clarify what David is saying, and he's not saying you should wipe Lysol wipes on everything before you eat it. He's just saying be careful and wash your fucking hands.
And as always, be kind, stay geeky, eat lots of cheesecake, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye. Later. Peace.
Bye. Toodaloo, motherfucker.